Thank you, Vince, and thank you everyone on the panel for a really wonderful conversation. It's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Senator Mark Warner. After 4 years in the Senate, Senator Mark Warner has established himself as a national leader in efforts to find bipartisan consensus, both to make government more efficient and to create balanced solutions to reduce the federal deficit. He has also been a champion for our armed service members, as well as a congressional leader in efforts to promote private sector innovation. From 2002 to 2006, Senator Warner served as the governor of Virginia, where he worked in a bipartisan way to turn record budget deficits into a surplus and to recruit 135,000 jobs to Virginia, during which time Virginia was consistently recognized as the nation's best managed state and the best state for business. Before entering public office, Senator Warner was an early investor in the cellular telephone business. He co-founded the company that became Nextel and ultimately made early investments in hundreds of startup companies that have created tens of thousands of private sector jobs. As a native Virginian and the co-founder of a Virginia company, I can say that all of us at CrowdCheck are honored to have Senator Warner both as an advocate and as a speaker here today. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Senator Mark Warner.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you for that introduction. I want to thank you and Sarah and everybody from CrowdCheck for inviting me. I think it's kind of a little spooky that the panel's going to stay here during the presentation. I don't care, whatever you'd like. You can, look at the cheat sheet here. Brian, as I was coming in, he's going, how's it going? Today's the first day Congress is back in session. And I said, beautiful day like this, NCAA tonight, I'm not really sure I want to be back yet. And he goes, it's got to be good to be back because, there's nothing controversial going on in Congress. Luckily, I'm going to talk a little bit about an area where there is a remarkable amount of actually bipartisan consensus. I have done a pitch on crowdfunding in some sense a variety of times. The challenge I've got, knowing some of the panelists, is you guys know probably more than I about the current details of state of play. So I want to give a little bit of a sense of kind of where we're at and kind of put this in a little slightly bigger context, and then be happy within kind of my extent of knowledge of trying to where I see some of the pitfalls and be happy to respond to any questions. A lot of this, from my standpoint, as a former venture capitalist, as somebody who believes that part of the challenges that America faces in this increasingly flat world is to make sure that all parts of our country get access to the opportunities that are created in entrepreneurial activities. I think some of the most remarkable work that's been done recently was the Kauffman Foundation study that kind of validated everything I kind of felt in my gut, but put some real data behind it, that over the last 25 years, literally 80% plus of all the new jobs created in America have come from startups. Not from, as we know, Fortune 500 companies who have been about net stable to slightly negative, not from even traditional small businesses who politicians all love to, pay tribute to, the hardware store, the dry cleaners, but it has come from startup enterprises. And unfortunately, as a former VC, we've seen a dramatic fall off in private equity and VC funding going into those startups. The data since before the recession, I think we saw venture funding going from about $43 billion a year down to about $10 billion, even private equity, later stage, going from $60 billion down to about 10. So from a policy standpoint, what I've tried to figure out is how do we make sure that we stay competitive? How do we make sure that we continue to have opportunities for startups, not just here in Greater Washington or Northern Virginia or the Valley, but all across the country? And ultimately that comes down, I think, whether we're in America or whether we're in China or whether we're in the Czech Republic, is this is a global competition for talent and capital. Now, on the talent standpoint, I know not something that was the subject of today. I just want to make, there's actually some good news. I do think slowly we are moving towards what I hope will be bipartisan rational immigration reform. And I've got legislation along with Senator Jerry Moran from Kansas that was both part of the Jobs Act, but also we now call it Startup 3.0, that really looks at the question of how America can win the talent competition. How do we make sure that we don't continue to train the world's best and the brightest and then send them home, particularly in the STEM fields? So how do we make sure that graduate degree programs in STEM fields can have a path to stay here in this country? How can we make sure that if you want to start that business here in America, we create a new category, entrepreneur visa, so that particularly folks who might be here on an H-1B, if they want to start an enterprise, they could actually have that opportunity to do it here as opposed to doing it elsewhere in the world. And I've been very supportive of those efforts to expand some of the H-1B opportunities. And my sense is, and more than sense, is that any immigration reform that will emerge bipartisan will have components of both the STEM visas, the entrepreneur visa, and the H-1B visas as a piece of that. And I think that is terribly important, particularly when we look just in the English-speaking world with the immigration reform that's taken place in Canada, Australia, and the UK, where we now have the circumstance on the worldwide competition for talent where, you know, at Virginia Tech we train that graduate PhD in electrical engineering, and under current immigration policies, instead of sending them back to Brazil or back to India, they simply can just move to Toronto and start their enterprise up there. That makes no sense as a business plan for America. So the talent piece, I think there's going to be some good news. On the capital piece, which has been obviously the subject of a lot of the discussion today, I truly believe that the crowdfunding opportunity could be revolutionary. I think back as somebody who became an entrepreneur back in the early 80s, and Brian's comment was that I was successful. He forgot the part that my first two business ventures were abject failures, and it was only on the third shot that I got a try in the wireless industry, and this was back in 1982. I had gone to law school at Harvard, and all my friends were at fancy law firms, and I will remember all of them back in 1982 saying, you know, Warner, you want me to invest in a car phone business? Who wants a car phone? Go get a real job. They're still practicing law and billing in 6-minute increments, but you know, I got an opportunity to get in the beginning of the wireless industry and was very, very lucky to be in that space, and then went on to be a VC. But you know, so I've seen this from an entrepreneur standpoint, the challenges around access to capital. I've seen it from a policy-making standpoint. And as we come now to the Jobs Act, I think we have the potential, I say this if I was restarting on the business side, being around crowdfunding, I think could be as transformative as the beginning of the VC industry, the beginning of the angel industries, if we get it right. Now, you've had the experts already go through, and I've got lots of comments here about you know, all the components. Okay, what's in the Jobs Act and the various standards in terms of you know, what the SEC and FINRA has to grapple through. I won't go through all that. I will tell you that I have met with 2 of the SEC commissioners within the last 6 weeks, including Mary Jo White, who now is an official chair of the commission as of this afternoon. And have raised the issue that, you know, Jobs Act, bipartisan, important opportunity, important new avenue around this question of crowdfunding. You know, we got to get the regulations out. We've got to get them out in a timely way. And I can tell you from, particularly with Chairman White, I think there was a real understanding that that this is an area that could be extraordinarily powerful in terms of that question around access to capital, particularly for those startup enterprises that may not be in the kind of hot centers around the country, and that she's got to get it right. I do think parts of the Jobs Act still raise some concerns with me. I say this as somebody who was a big supporter and can remember times during in the Democratic caucus trying to make the argument that this was not, you know, your old style type of investing in some of the investor abuse, but I do think there are some problems still around the kind of Reg D component on the private placement issues and some of the general solicitation rules. I think there is still subject of potential for some abuse in that area, and we have to be particularly careful about that, but that should not preclude the SEC from going ahead and moving forward on getting the regs and rules out about the internet-based component in terms of crowdfunding. I want to make a couple of quick, again, comments on 3 specific areas that I think we have to be careful about moving forward. First, I think we all realize, and I think one of the, maybe it was this panel or maybe the preceding panel that talked about the potential for fraud in this area. And there's going to be mistakes made. There's going to be fraud in this area. And one of the things that I think is potentially is quite important for the SEC and FINRA to get right is that in an effort to cut off all mistakes entirely, we don't so overdo on the regulatory front that we kind of have this whole potential new tool stillborn coming out of the chute. And that is going to mean that the power of the web, the power of the internet to self-police is going to be extraordinarily important. It's also going to mean that that issuers and portals are going to have to be, I think, very diligent about ensuring that people understand that many of these investments are going to be quite risky. Everybody loves to talk about their successes as a VC or an investor. I have had a number of successes, but even in my best years, we had 60% failure rate in most of our investing. It would be a home run year if we had 40% of our investments do well when I was a venture capitalist. The numbers you all know in this room are more like 90, 95% failure rate. People never hear about the failures, they only hear about the successes, and as we kind of enter into this whole new class of unsophisticated investors trying to kind of, particularly the portals, getting right the idea that there is going to be a great potential for loss is very important. And then if we find where there are portals, before we get to the issuers, we have portals that are not acting in good faith, it's going to be really important for the industry, for the community, not let's say the industry, for the community to clamp down and use the power of the web to say, hey, these are bad guys, these are bad folks, this is not a trusted site, this is not a trusted portal. And that is going to be something that is going to be very, very important. I think on the issuer standpoint, secondly, issuers are going to have to recognize that there's a whole new set of rules and series of liabilities that you're going to have to understand. The idea that within a Kickstarter approach that you can do this very cool video and sell a potential person on the value of that social enterprise or that group and getting some gee whiz perk back from it, works great for Kickstarter and Kiva and on some of the other sites. The challenge now is going to be issuers are going to have to realize that those project videos are going to carry with them liability. And the claims you make and the statements you make in those videos will be treated as kind of effect part of the security issuance. And I think there's going to be a whole level of education, again, that the portals will have to do to issuers about how much curating you're going to be willing to do or able to do on the whole question of the content of what the issuers are putting forward. And then finally, the challenge that probably most of us in this room understand who've been investors, but I think it's going to be a kind of a wild, wild west for some time going forward, is going to be, what does due diligence mean? We do know that while the Jobs Act made some fairly major changes both in terms of on-ramp audit reporting for companies going public and traditional means that have ratcheted back, we've actually not seen, that may be a good notion, that we've not seen a lot of the emerging growth companies who've gone ahead and gone public recently cut back dramatically on the audit statement requirements, but there will, figuring out as a portal, what kind of standard you want to have in terms of audit statements is, and trying to get some more guidance from the SEC on that is going to be important. Liability issues, obviously, are going to be important as well, as I mentioned that on the project videos. And then finally, the question on background checks. I think, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, but it is an area that I think responsible portals will at least want to do some level of curation on to make sure that that one of your issuers hasn't got a foot-long record of former securities violations or criminal violations or other things. Seems like common sense, but there's going to be mistakes made on the front end, and we're going to have to find a way to and as somebody who's been an advocate in this field and somebody who was believe that, as I mentioned at the outset, that it has enormous potential, you're going to need to work with me and other policymakers so that we can argue your case. But let's remember, a few bad apples coming out of at the early stages could spoil this industry before it even gets born. So you all who, whether you're on the issuer standpoint or whether you're going to be on the portal standpoint, you have to be part of this process. You cannot do what has been done so often in the financial industry, where you turn a blind eye to bad behavior in the industry. There was a lot of that went on between 2002 and 2006 or 7 on Wall Street, and the economy is still paying the price for that. We're not going to have that same kind of, I think, patience or that same kind of public patience or legal patience, since there's still an enormous amount of uncertainty about what this law really entails with most of the members, that if we end up with some bad actions coming out on the front end, it could be dramatically challenging. The good news is, we are starting to see, I think I got data here that shows in the last 9 months, we've seen 53 companies, emerging growth companies, completed IPOs between April 5th and December 15th. That's pretty good news. We've seen the fact, I think the amount of funds raised over crowdfunding, you guys will probably know, has gone up 87% in the last year. We have seen the circumstance that if we don't get this right in America, this will happen elsewhere. I think I mentioned the Czech, somebody told me, and correct me if I'm wrong, was it the Czech Republic or somebody else, some places in Europe has already moved, Italy, far ahead of America's. So this is a worldwide transformation. We have to get it right. I will put in a final plug for Virginia, and recognizing CrowdCheck as a Virginia company. The Virginia General Assembly this year passed one of the first state laws, crowdfunding laws of any state in the country, where it says that any company that has equity fundraising through crowdfunding should be eligible for the same level of grants, programs, and other governmental support system as any other company, so that we don't create kind of a second class. Maybe it's a little overkill, but I got to put a plug in for the fact that the General Assembly in Virginia got it right. Last comment I'll make before the questions is that, reiterating the point that I made earlier, you're going to need to work with legislators in both parties who want to see this become successful, because there are going to be mistakes made. And the sooner you can help expose those and get them to us so that we can continue to work with the SEC and FINRA to make sure that we don't get an overreaction, the better. So with thanks to the panel here, much better going this way than going through Neitha Bidway, who is, many of you know, who is my lead on this, and we have had 5 roundtables around Virginia in the last 9 months on this issue. Enormous interest. We had 70 potential entrepreneurs in Harrisonburg, Virginia, in the Shenandoah Valley 10 days ago. This really does have the potential, I think, to open up the possibilities of emerging company growth everywhere in America and everywhere in the world, and we've got to make sure America takes advantage of it. So with that, my thanks to all of you. I know it's been a long afternoon, but I'd be happy to take questions or comments. Thank you all very much. Questions, comments? Yes, sir.
Senator Water, what is the Republican House is doing as far as dealing with crowdfunding is concerned? In other words, how is has the Financial Services Committee ever got involved in crowdfunding and talk? In other words, they talk about what goes on in crowdfunding. And also, what kind of financial issue is the Republican House talking about? Are they talking about something that about a small business committee and so forth?
Well, I don't think, I mean, I think crowdfunding obviously is going to be, make sure I understand the question, I think crowdfunding is going to be available to every type of company. And I don't think you'll see, the legislation's been passed, we're waiting for the regulations to come out from the kind of regulatory standpoint, the SEC, which is the governmental regulation, and FINRA, which is the industry regulation, where this will fall in terms of congressional jurisdiction, whether it's a small business committee or finance, commerce committee, which I'm on, I think is, unknown at this point. But I think the thing in terms of additional governmental support, I don't think you're going to see additional governmental support in this area. I think this is kind of, if anything, you could see if we end up with too many early bad actors, you could see actually government trying to further restrict this. And I think that's one of my big concerns right now, that a few bad stories on the front end could do real harm to this industry. Yes, sir.
Hi, Senator. Greg Simon.
Hey, Greg.
Good to see you.
Good to see you again.
You recall when you were working on the Telecom Reform Act in the Clinton administration, people had no idea how the public would take the freedoms of letting phones offer video and cable offer phone to create, with the internet, all of the things we take for granted now. So I applaud your work with the SEC to get the rules out. I don't think we need to start off by worrying about fraud. I think we need to start off by being excited about the fact that crowdfunding, and both accredited investors and non-accredited investors, is going to create opportunities that nobody in Congress could have envisioned, because it's not humanly possible to anticipate what the American innovation will bring to this law. But if we wait another year, we will have lost thousands of jobs and millions of dollars, and nobody understands that better than you. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Greg. And, and listen, today's April 5th, the day the President signed the law a year ago. It would have been great to be here today. I think that was probably what Brian and Sarah originally thought. Let's do this seminar today. Maybe things would have been a little clearer. The only hesitancy, I would say, is you're right, we can't predict how this is going to turn out. But remember, all we're doing here is opening up another access to capital for innovators. And, there is enormous, and I say this I'll match my capitalist credentials with anybody in the room, but I didn't appreciate how much bad stuff was going on Wall Street till I got this job. So, and there, I can remember standing in the Democratic caucus and hearing senators stand up and say, this is going to turn into kind of boiler room telephone shops that, prey upon, unsophisticated senior citizens. And I said, you're thinking old school as opposed to eBay. Who would have figured that, we'd be trading billions of dollars with very little oversight, governmental oversight, in a trading network 10 or 15 years ago. The only thing I would I don't want to overstate this, but the market right now, I think the public market and public sentiment is very skeptical of deals that sound too good to be true. And we could end up with a couple of bad experiences coming out, and I think hurting the growth of this, and this industry ending up in other countries. So having, those of you who are going to be portals, thinking long and hard about what your criteria are going to be is going to be really important. But I get it.
Well, the best way to avoid that is to get the rules of the road out as quickly as possible.
Amen.
Delay is the enemy if you're worried about fraud.
Amen. Amen. And and one of the things that I think, one of the conversations I think this would be, is that the SEC is also thinking about, that really it won't be that applicable to crowdfunding per se, but they're thinking about redefining the whole question of what a qualified investor is. You know, one of the things I think that has perhaps shown from the experience of leading up to the financial recession was that the idea of a $250,000 income strata or a $1 million asset value, particularly if you might have a house that has become that, may not be a sign of a sophisticated investor. Maybe that ought to be based upon, you know, the amount of money you've had in some kind of registered brokered account for a while. That might be a better idea of someone who's kind of more willing to kind of understand the risks of the market. So that's something else they're working on. But I don't want to get too in the weeds here. What I've tried to stress to the SEC, get the crowdfunding stuff out, even if it takes a little while longer on the general solicitation rules around Reg D. So I think we're basically agreeing.
Thank you.
Well, this is going to be the last question unless anybody wants to preempt me, which I'm happy to do. This might sound a bit ahead of its time since we don't even have the regulations for the Jobs Act, but we've got the Jobs Act, we've got the various startup acts that you're working on with respect to immigration, you've got the 3.0. Could we look forward maybe to a Jobs Act 4.0 with some of the stuff that I think the portals and the broker-dealers might need with respect to being able to do things like curation and more investment advice? Is this premature? Is it possible?
It's a great question. And I don't really know if I've, you know, in the old days, I could wing the answer and nobody would remember. In today's day and age, you know, everything you say can and will be used against you. I don't think there is an appetite for a Jobs Act 4.0 or a curation at this point. I think there is even a sense that, you know, as a supporter of the Jobs Act, I have to tell you there were parts that I wish we could have back and have a second look at. Less around.
Do you want to say which they are?
Well, less around crowdfunding and more around general solicitation issues. So I think it's going to take a while for the industry to hopefully self-set some standards. And didn't we have someone on one of the panels from FINRA here? So might be better than, you know, asking that rule about whether Congress should dictate this. Maybe what does the industry think?
Well, we're not the industry.
Well, I know.
Yeah, we're not the industry.
Oh, I know, but
if the question is when the rules are going to come out, we'll be right behind the SEC. If the question,
there's a strong political answer.
Yeah, well, no.
That sounds like a candidate guy.
If the question is, will the rules be changed to allow curation, that maybe, but our rules will change too, because our rules are going to be lighter for funding portals because they don't solicit, they don't recommend. If you start soliciting, recommending, you start acting like a broker-dealer, then you require more supervision.
Is that, so my urging would be, I would be concerned about trying to put another piece of legislation out there in the short term, because I just think the risk of actually more things being taken away rather than kind of expanded would be more the challenge at this point. Would you concur?
You never know what happens when something goes through Congress. Right?
Yeah, oh gosh. Yeah, you know, the kind of the debt and deficits thing, you know, it shouldn't be this hard. I could actually give you the long or short pitch on that, but yeah, things in Congress are always much harder. But what I would, again, simply say is I promise to try to keep the pressure on the SEC to get these regs out. I'd ask you to keep pressure and watch each other and be willing to call out bad actors early on is, I think, really important, particularly from the portal standpoint. And I think the more proactive we can be on investor education and educating issuers about liability and due diligence, the better for all concerned. We've got to make sure that this becomes an American innovation hub. And I think where the possibility is going to be, this is going to open up remarkable possibilities in urban centers and in rural communities to get access. We all think about this around the tech field. Frankly, I think in a lot of communities, it's going to be less the tech companies, and it's going to be even some traditional industries that suddenly are going to be able to get access to capital that otherwise would have had to move away from home. And trying to open up that opportunity that you can build it anywhere is a goal we ought to all aspire to. So with that, my thanks to all of you. Again, my thanks to Brian Keith for their help.